Hello, my name is Benedikt Peschl, and I welcome you to our first video on the syntax of Avestan. The aim of the first part of this video is to introduce you to the basic characteristics of the Avestan noun phrase. In a second part, we will look at Avestan adpositional structures and at the syntactical behavior of local particles. Finally, I will give you an idea how these same local particles are also used as preverbs. Let us first look at the sequence in which the constituents of a noun phrase are arranged in Avestan. In syntax, we call this linearization. The following constellations can be regarded as standard for the internal structure of the noun phrase in pragmatically neutral contexts. We find determiners followed by nouns, quantifiers followed by nouns, but nouns preceding attributive genitives. It should be pointed out, however, that no systematic study of this question is available at this point, and due to the nature of our sources, our data to examine it is limited. Combinations of more than one of these elements are rare, and above all, the default order of a noun combined with an attribute adjective is rather uncertain. This is nicely illustrated by the contradicting evidence of fixed terms such as angra mainiu, the evil spirit, where the adjective angra, evil, precedes the noun, but daina Zarathustris, the Zoroastrian vision, where the adjective Zarathustri follows the noun. Nouns and adjectives which function as their attributes generally agree in terms of number, case, and gender. We will see many examples of this in the current and subsequent sessions. However, in the texts we also find occasional deviations from the basic rule. A peculiar but regular mismatch of Young Avestan is that the nominative accusative plural of a group of neuter nouns, the so-called RN stems, take attributes in the instrumental case. An example is Yim Wiesbaich Paitisch Marente Jaisch Spinterhe Mainiush Damon. Here, Wiesbaich, all should agree with the nominative plural damon, but it doesn't. Instead, we find the adjective in the instrumental case. The same can be said of the relative pronoun jaish, which also should agree with daman in the nominative plural, but instead we find the instrumental. Most nominal stems in Avestan are analyzable as consisting of a root syllable and one or more than one suffix. Grammatical gender, which in Avestan includes the masculine, the feminine, and the neuter, is largely determined morphologically by the stem final suffix of a given stem. Thus, A stems are always masculine or neuter, A stems and E stems are feminine, and A stems are mostly neuter, and so on. The limited number of non-derived nouns, that is, nouns which synchronically cannot be analyzed into root and suffix, receive their gender based purely on semantic criteria. Examples are the non-derived nouns gau, which denotes a cow and is consequently feminine, nar, man, masculine, and as you can see, the same applies also to nouns that are derived with one of the few suffixes which are unspecified with regard to gender, such as the suffix an in the noun urshan, bull, which, because a bull is masculine by nature, is a masculine noun. When required, natural gender is marked by means of a stem class shift. This applies to both nouns and adjectives. Thus, the feminine counterpart of the masculine noun aspa, horse, is aspa. Stems in a are by default feminine. And likewise, the feminine counterpart of the masculine adjective drigu, poor, is driwi, reflecting an underlying form drigwi. And we have already seen that stems in E, like those in A, are by default feminine. With animals, natural gender may also be made explicit by adding nouns such as arshan, male animal, and dainu, female animal, in adposition. When accompanying two nouns of different gender, attributes seem to agree with the noun to which they are more closely situated. The evidence for this is, however, weak. We can see an example here. Drirumcha, driwimcha, arathvioberete, baremne. Here, a masculine and a feminine noun, drirum, the poor man, and driwim, the poor woman, are coordinated by cha, and, which occurs twice here, and they take an attribute in the dual baremne, treated, whose gender, feminine, agrees with that of the second member of the pair, driwim, the poor woman. We are now moving on to the second main section of the current presentation. Here we will deal with adpositional structures and also with local particles, that is, that class of words which, amongst other uses, function as adpositions. Avestan knows few words which exclusively function as adpositions. In short, exclusive adpositions. These include mat, with, which governs the instrumental case, and hacha, which governs the ablative case. Hacha means either from or according to, depending on whether it is used as a pre- or postposition. Otherwise, the boundaries between adpositions, preverbs, and adverbs are blurred, and the respective elements are more conveniently referred to as local particles, here abbreviated with LP. The exact function of an LP in a given instance may be open to debate. For instance, in the present example, Mirshdata moi adai kachjachit paiti, the local particle paiti could on the one hand be read as a postposition meaning at, together with the locative adai kachjachit, acting at its complement. Thus, have mercy on me at every offering. On the other hand, paiti could also represent an independent adverb meaning in return, which brings us to a rather different translation, be merciful in return for each offering of mine. In the next example, the local particle upa could be taken as a preposition meaning to or towards. Thus, to that tree he goes. Upa tom vanom, to that tree. Or upa may also be a fronted preverb, which modifies the verb aiti to mean not just go, but to approach. Which would bring us to a slightly different translation. He approaches that tree. The dislocation of the preverb with regard to the verb, called tmesis, is a frequent phenomenon in Avestan. We will get back to it shortly. An interesting question is to what degree the use of certain local particles as adpositions has become grammaticalized in Young Avestan. In the case of full grammaticalization, the presence of the adposition would be indispensable for the entire expression to make sense. The case form of the noun would in turn have lost its semanticity and would merely serve to indicate the noun's syntactical dependency from the adposition. Now, the Avestan corpus provides contradictory evidence regarding the degree to which this kind of grammaticalization has happened. We find many examples suggesting that when you wish to express that something is situated on something, the use of the bare locative case is entirely sufficient. Thus we get bune on the bottom. In this case, on the bottom of the lake. But the same spatial relation, the position of something on something, may also be expressed by adding the local particle paiti as an adposition. Thus we get raithe paiti on the chariot. The optional character of the adposition suggests that the construction of adpositional paiti with the locative case is only incompletely grammaticalized. Yet, interestingly, other instances of paiti, such as the third one on our slide, seem to suggest that the grammaticalization of paiti to an adposition is fairly complete. Zom paiti ahoradautam, on the earth which is created by Ahura, which is Ahura Mazda. Here the case form of the noun, the accusative, merely indicates grammatical dependency, and the spatial relation on is expressed by paiti alone. Next, we shall look at the use of local particles not as adpositions, but as preverbs. Preverbs are particles which, roughly speaking, are prefixed to verbs to modify the verb's meaning. As with adpositions, there are some particles which are exclusively used as preverbs, such as vi, ni, fra, and ham, meaning apart, down, forth, together. These are again joined by some of the ambiguous local particles which I have previously discussed. Examples are again paiti, which we have seen used in different ways before, antar, between, pairi, around, a, to, at, and so on. When used as preverbs, these local particles behave exactly the same way as exclusive preverbs do. Very rarely, two preverbs are added to a verb, such as paiti ava I, to go down towards. Note here that in our manuscripts, preverbs are usually separated from their verbs by means of a word dividing dot, just like the members of nominal compounds are often separated. In many cases, the combination of a given verb and a preverb is evidently lexicalized, as can be seen from the resulting non-compositional meaning. Thus the verb chi, to pile up, when modified by the exclusive preverb vi, apart, has come to mean to discern, not just to pile up apart or to pile up at different spots, which would be its compositional meaning. The same applies to non-exclusive preverbs such as antare, inside, between, which, when added to the verb mru, to speak, changes the verb's meaning to banish. So here the meaning has developed quite a lot from its compositional meaning, to speak in between. Despite the apparent fixation of many preverb-verb combinations, preverbs of all types are frequently subject to a fronting process called tmesis. The pragmatic implications of this process are not always discernible, but it seems that the fronting of the preverb can be regarded as equivalent to the fronting of the entire verb. There are several subtypes of tmesis, depending on the landing side of the preverb in the clause. The most common type, here listed under A, involves fronting of the preverb to clause initial, or in the meter of the Old Avestan Gathas also hemistich initial position. Here is an occurrence of the verb antare mu, to banish, which we've seen before in the Gathas, where antare is not found at its default place in front of the verb, but is moved to the beginning of the sentence. Antare vispeng drikvato hachmeng mruye. Antare muye. Antare is here the preverb of muye, and yet we find it in the beginning of the sentence. I banish all adherents of the deceit from the community. In the course of an early redaction of the Old Avestan text, the preverb, however, was often restored in front of the verb. So in the manuscript, we actually find two preverbs here, one in its fronted position and one in front of the verb. However, the meter of the passage shows us that the redundant second occurrence of the preverb was certainly not a part of the original text, but was inserted by later reductors. Let us look at type B. This type applies when the clause initial position is blocked by a complementizer, relative, or interrogatives, and potentially by adjacent enclitics. In this case, the fronted preverb follows that clause initial element. Thus, in this example, the preverb ham together is separated from the verb jasad, comes, but it does not move to the beginning of the clause, and is instead it turns up after the sentence initial complementizer yesi, if, and the enclitics attached to it, cha and he. The example under point C on the slide illustrates another syntactically conditioned subtype of tmesis, namely the intrusion of enclitics between preverb and verb. Yo trifjat va appa va ya saiti, who either steals it or takes it away. So here the verbs trifjat, steals, and appa ya saiti, takes away, are linked by the enclitic double disjunction va or either or. In the case of appa ya saiti, va is inserted not after the inflected verb, so it's not trifjat va appa ya saiti va, but it is inserted right after the preverb, as is regularly the case in such constellations. Finally, I'd like to mention another rare type of tmesis, which does not involve a fronting process, but a backing of the preverb to clause final position. The example here is Yatha bo stavas ayeni paiti, so that I will go towards ayeni paiti, so that I will go towards you, praising stavas. Where the preverb, which by default would be expected to stand in front of ayeni, is moved to clause final position. This appears to be an alternative strategy to comply with the constraint that complementizers such as yatha, so that, block the clause initial position. So with the clause initial position blocked, the preverb is forced to land at another, ideally pragmatically prominent position in the clause, for instance, at the end. I have already mentioned that on the level of pragmatics, the fronted preverb often seems to represent the entire verb. There's another indication for the assumption that the preverb represents the entire preverb-verb complex in syntactical operations. This evidence comes from the fact that when a verb with a preverb is repeated, the verb is, on the surface, typically dropped. See this example. Fira verahi yasnimcha vachmimcha fira manangaha fira vachangha fira shiauthana. I offer fira verahi both sacrifice and eulogy to you. I offer them through thought, manangha, through speech, vachangha, and through action. So instead of a repetition of the entire verb fira rahi in the second part of the clause, only the preverb fira is repeated 3 times. So this was the first video of our series on Avestan morphosyntactic structures. Please also join me for the second video, which will be about predication in Avestan.